Okay, welcome to part 2 of lecture 3 because I forgot the tiniest little detail that you're going to need to know for your lab 1. So here I've defined a bunch of functions, but there's another way to actually define these functions. You can actually declare them like variables that don't exist yet. Let's see here. Have we done that anywhere here? No. But like in your main function, it's possible to declare the fact that you have a variable and then later set it to a certain value. You can kind of do the same thing for functions, and we call those function declarations. So let me write it here. Functions can be defined before they are implemented. And this is useful if you ever try and write a function that depends on another function, which depends on that original function as well. This helps make your code look cleaner because you can then put everything below the main function. Everything below the main function. And it's also necessary when you have two functions that need to call each other. For example, if I have, I don't know, a function f that somewhere in its body calls a function g, and and then I have a function g that somewhere in its body calls a function f. If you don't do this kind of declaration, this function declaration that I'm talking about, defined, or I should be saying declared, sorry. Functions can be declared before they're implemented. If you don't do this kind of declaration for these particular functions, the compiler will complain because it reads them in order. So it's going to read this call to this g function, and it's going to be like, what's g? What are you talking about? I don't see that yet when it's down here. So you need to declare these functions first, which just means give their names and their parameters, and then a semicolon. A function declaration is just the first line, usually, of the function. It's the return type, function name, and parameter names and types. Technically, you can get away with just parameter types, and then a semicolon. Okay, so here's my function. Just don't give it the braces. It's just a function with a semicolon instead of braces. All right? That's all that means. So let me now declare all of these functions that we've defined so that I can put them below the main function and make this look slightly prettier. So let me make a new terminal and make it large so that we can change this and see it happening and working. So let me cd into my desktop, CS16, Spring 2020, code from class. And this is lecture 3. Okay, here we are now with all our stuff. And let me then go and move these functions down below main. So now, if I try and compile the program, I'm going to get an error because the compiler is going to see calls to these functions when it hasn't read the fact that the functions exist yet. So let's do g++ functions.cpp-o functions. And saying use of undeclared identifier, which means I don't know what you're talking about here. What is absolute value? But we can declare the functions up here. So and define them later. Or we can say implement them later. So here is the declaration that of the fact that there is an absolute value function that will be defined eventually. Don't worry, compiler. It takes one argument that's of type int, and it returns an int. And that's all the compiler needs to know when it sees this absolute value to say that, oh yes, the types make sense. I'm going to print out an int here, and I'm going to wait for you to actually define this function. And And then we can say int sum xy. So that's a declaration of the sum function. And here's the declaration of the hello world function. It's really just these function names with semicolons instead of braces, not an issue. So now we can recompile and rerun. And it does just what we did before, but with the addition of these function declarations, and we can put their definitions because of that below the main function, which makes things look prettier sometimes. Okay, that is function declarations in a nutshell.